All right, we're ready.
Oh, we're ready?
We're ready.
Ready? Oh, okay, good. All right. All right, well, let's go. All right. Welcome. I guess it's day 2 of the Dev Summit. So we'll start talking in this session about AI-driven platform engineering and the idea of bringing the intent of the developer into the inner loop. I'm Mark Weitzel. I'm a principal PM and architect at Microsoft. I have the great pleasure of working with Jay on a lot of our platform engineering effort, which spans a number of groups across our organization. But I also have product responsibilities for Redis, Grafana, code optimization, app configuration, and a few other things. So, Jay, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jay Schmelzer. I'm one of the another one of the directors in the Core AI platform and tools team at Microsoft. The last several years, had the opportunity to actually lead what we refer to as a forward deploy engineering team, so customer-facing part of the product group, where we go out and do interesting things with customers doing interesting things. And one of the spaces that my team and I have had the opportunity to work in for probably the last 7 or more years, before I think any of us were even calling it platform engineering, was this space of platform engineering. So, what Mark and I want to do is just kind of share some thoughts with you about how we're thinking about this, how we're thinking about the evolution of it. Maybe to help us kind of understand a little bit of who we're talking to and force you into some exercise. Quick show of hands. How many of you would consider yourself platform engineers today? Awesome.
Awesome.
How many of you work in an organization that are investing in this notion of platform engineering? How many of you have nothing better to do than sit? No, just kidding. How many of you are thinking about, like, okay, what does this platform engineering mean to me, and trying to figure out what it could mean to our organization? You? So I think we got the right people.
How many people are currently using AI in their platform engineering? Okay, good,
awesome.
good.
Cool.
All right, good.
Cool. You got a good set.
All right.
So what we'll do is first, really quickly, just level set for everyone. All right. So why are we even thinking about this notion of platform engineering? What's driving this? Well, there are obviously, it's an extremely exciting time to be in the application development space, but it's also an increasingly challenging time, right? We have all kinds of different priorities, all kinds of different things pulling at us in different directions, making it really difficult to have any kind of consistency and so forth, right? And that's only growing. Like, we used to talk about this and show the kind of cloud native CNCF project list, which was always growing and kind of becoming the next version of an eye exam for somebody. And that was before we even started bringing in the notion of like the aspects of AI, right? And generative AI and the kinds of things that people are building. So a whole nother dimension of things that as an engineering organization we're being asked to work with and think about how we manage across our teams. Often, hopefully not all of you, but I'm sure some of you will relate to this. The way this starts to kind of surface for a development team is an unfortunate series of opportunities to meet all the different people across your organization responsible for different parts of what's involved in application development. In other words, hey, if you want to go do something simple, like start experimenting with creating a web app in Azure, the first thing you need to do is go talk to the cloud enablement team. Okay, there's an email. Oh, we have office hours this time, so come between 9 and 10 on Mondays, and you can talk to us about it. Oh, and when you do that, we're going to give you this survey to fill out to tell us what it is you want to do, and then come back next week for the office hours, right? Oh, and now you got to go meet security, and now you got to meet the DevOps folks, and it just goes on and on and on, right? I had a customer I was working with that shared that email experience with me that one of their poor engineers went through. Took them, I believe, almost 2 months, I think, to just get a place in an Azure sandbox that they could start deploying into. Now, funny part of this story is that the person who finally unblocked them and showed them that, hey, we actually have the beginnings of an engineering platform that you can self-serve, was the security lead. Like, the chief security lead was the one who actually had been investing in this. He, of course, was the last person that this engineer talked to, because you're never going to ask security for something, right? They're just going to say no. But he was pleasantly surprised that they had started this investment, right? And was able, within an hour, he had the environment that he needed to start working in. So that's really what we're trying to do, right, as platform engineers, right? When we think about the kinds of things that you may be investing in or you may be trying to do, your journey typically starts with one or more of these, and you start building out, these different things. Maybe, the primary motivation is we just want to get our head around what do we have? What's out there? What's being deployed? Let's get an inventory of what's going on, right? Maybe we are fortunate we're able to look at some of the high toil parts of a software engineering, software development process and start automating those and reducing them, streamlining them. Maybe we're even further along and we're actually to the point where we want to really start having some full stack kind of standards, like paved paths of how we enable people to get started in a consistent way. Lots of different ways, you could get started here, lots of ways that, you can go build out and decide to emphasize based on what's most important to you and your organization, right? So thinking about these different journeys, thought it'd be interesting to just kind of quickly share a little bit of some of them. So at Microsoft, we've been on this journey for probably a dozen years at least. We call it our one engineering system. Yep, even internally, our naming is very creative. So one ES is what we call this. And this was a bit of a combination. There were some things that we were starting to do a little bit ground up, like kind of bottom up type of things. But then we really were able to accelerate when Satya came in as CEO, very strong engineering background, had visibility, had worked across many of the divisions of the company, saw all the silos, right, and made a top-down focus on, hey, we need to be investing in ourselves, right? We need to really do this. That's a trend we've started seeing with a number of customers we work with, right? That when you can start getting that higher level buy-in, right, and have someone start, emphasizing the value of this, it really helps the acceleration. For us, and again, I think this is pretty common, there were really three things we were trying to do. We had a bunch of silos, right? Each division at Microsoft managed and created their own engineering system, right? And of course, because what Windows needs is totally different than what Azure is going to need and totally different than what Office is going to need. And the only people that know how to do that would be those people in those teams, right? So we reinvented everything. We had many implementations of the same thing, very little sharing. So first thing we wanted to do was really break those silos, start bringing these folks together, right? Sharing learning, sharing best practices, and then start sharing implementations as well, right? We wanted to, reduce all that redundancy, start kind of sharing, building upon the work of each other, right, to accelerate that. And then there were a bunch of just what we call fundamentals that we were not consistently doing across the product. Things that you as customers expect from our products and services around security and compliance and all these other kinds of things, right? And so that was one of the opportunities we saw here. So, and it's a thing that I see with most, of the customers that I work with as well. So if we think about kind of what that sort of looks like from an organizational structure, what we've done is we have kind of this one engineering system team, this kind of platform engineering group. There are folks from all of those different teams across the company, the security folks, the infrastructure folks, right? Our networking folks, many of our kind of DevSecOps, experts, right? They all have their own teams and they're doing lots of things, but they all have a representation in this group, right? So we're trying to bring all of that together. We'll talk about some of these other characteristics, but, because we do this in a way that is an internally open source project, so an inner source type of experience, all of those other divisions are now able to act as kind of spokes, right? So a hub and spoke kind of model. They now have smaller platform engineering teams that are just looking out for the unique interests of that organization, right? Often always asking, is this really unique to the Office team, or should it be part of our core engineering platform? And if so, let's build it as part of the core engineering platform, contribute it there, right? So a team of, let's say, 100 people at the core, at any point in time, could actually have 300 engineers contributing into that platform for the whole organization, right? We'll talk a bit about some of the things that we find work and have helped us for adoption. getting people to onboard to the platform, that's actually one of the keys, right? We enable the engineers to speak to each other in the language engineers know how to speak, which is code and work items and backlogs and things like that, right? Complete transparency in what's going on and why it's going on and how to contribute and help make it better. I think as part of this too, it's obviously really important when you're going to go on one of these, start one of these initiatives to really be intentional about what are we trying to accomplish, right? And for us, there were really 4 things that we were focused on, right? We wanted to ensure that Microsoft was a place that engineers wanted to come work, felt that they could do their best work, and felt supported to do that. I would like to say that when I joined the company 23 years ago, that was a very commonly held thought amongst our engineers, but it was not, right? And so that's a really important part of this. We've talked about the collaboration and breaking down the silos. That was a key part of it. We also needed to ensure that we're meeting those fundamentals, right? That from the start, we were achieving that consistent level of quality, trust, and stuff that you expected from us. And then ultimately, the one that everybody talks about was we wanted to increase the rate at which we were delivering value, right? Go from our old, 2-year product cycles at Microsoft, which never lasted 2 years, right? They were always longer than that, to a ability to deliver value to you on the cadence that you wanted as a customer, right? So some teams that is multiple times a day, others it's daily, others it's weekly, monthly, whatever is most appropriate, right? We needed the engineering environment to not be the constraining fact, right? We needed it to be enablement, let you go as quickly as you wanted to go. When we get into there, so those 4 things, those have been the focus for the dozen or so years that we've been working on this. The specific things we measured, those have changed. Those have evolved over time. So at one point, it's still a lot like this. I'll show you in a minute how we've even come a little bit further in that regard. But, really pivoting these things to look at things that we could measure that were more true direct measurements of the outcomes that we were trying to achieve versus the activities that people were doing on a daily basis, right? And obviously, if you're gonna change some things that you're gonna measure, you should also look at what things should we stop looking at. And it turns out, from a leadership organizational standpoint, we stopped looking at all the things, many of the things that we used to look at. Because when you think about that, most of these, they're just activities. They're measurements of activities. I know Mark's gonna laugh because he knows my favorite one on here is number of bugs found. I should have underlined that sometime. Found being the word. That's what we counted. That's what we tracked. Not how many we fixed. How many we found, right? So we put endless amounts of energy into these triage meetings, right? Arguing back and forth. Should we fix that bug? Should we not? Oh, we're not going to fix it this milestone. Let's punt it to the next milestone. Why? So we can have the discussion again in 6 months. Should we fix this bug or not? Oh, we're not going to fix it in this release. Put it in the next release so we can discuss again if we should do it, right? Complete waste of time, waste of energy, right? And at the end of the day, as an engineering leader, wasn't super helpful, right, to see how many bugs we had, knowing we weren't going to fix them all anyway, right? We wanted to get to the ones that were meaningful. Now, these are still interesting KPIs for like level 1 types of managers often, right? Gives you a sense of kind of the health of your team, the state of your team. Organizationally, obviously we found they weren't. We found some had some value, so we do still leverage the bug number, the active bug number a bit, but more from a health perspective, right? We have the concept of a bug jail, right, or a bug cap, right? We have lots of data. As engineers, we love data. We know how many bugs on average an engineer at Microsoft can fix. So that quota, that weekly quota for the team is kind of what we put as a cap to ensure no team is holding everybody else hostage because of their debt, right, or their challenges. Now, one of the things that, we kind of, we'll talk a bit about some of the other aspects of the engineering platform, but one of the core things that it enables us to do is we now, because we are getting a consistent base of tooling, we have a consistent base that we can be gathering data from as well, right? And we can start doing more interesting things with that data, right? So today, the way we measure kind of the health of a team is we provide our engineering directors with the set of components, set of measurements that we refer to as engineering thrive. And it's really made up of these main things, right? There's a huge component that's about satisfaction, right? We actually go out and ask our engineers how they feel about the engineering system. Is it helping them, be more, do more work, be more efficient in what they're doing, or is it getting in their way? We then compare that with interesting telemetry we can get from the products. Things like, time to first PR. That's backed up by our research teams that have gone out and proven that, hey, it turns out an engineer that contributes, makes their first commitment to the code base in a short period of time is more likely to stay a member of that team. Said the other way, someone that goes weeks and weeks before they make their first contribution is more likely to leave the team, causing you churn and more overhead to bring people in. So we look at that. We look at the velocity of these, how long are PRs waiting to be merged, those kinds of things. The ones that are kind of really interesting these days and a big focus is that notion of focus time, right? Are we giving our engineers and our product makers time in their day to actually, Amanda always calls it like getting in the flow, getting in the zone, right? Like really get in and do focused work. Or have we done the thing where their calendars look like mine, where it's kind of like Swiss cheese, right? Like, oh, I got a half an hour here, I can do some work, right? And then I got a meeting, and then I got, right? And so we look, we leverage things like Viva and stuff like that to get some basic telemetry out and understand it. Are there things we could do? Is there low-hanging fruit of like, hey, let's defrag everybody's calendars a little bit, right? And be intentional about this. Let's give them more time to actually be product making. Now, it turns out inside Microsoft, our benchmark here for an engineer is that they have 25 hours a week to do product making work. Not all teams are there quite yet, but that's kind of what we're striving for. And yes, I've had many fun conversations with CTOs and CIOs, like 25 hours? No, my people are doing 40. Your people are lying to you because that is not what's happening, right? The next one that then starts to evolve into this next idea that we're sort of previewing internally, which is the idea of a bad developer day, right? How many bad developer days are you having? Some of that is like my focus time got interrupted. I'm dealing with a live site issue, right? Like let's understand how that's happening, what's contributing, and what can we start doing with tools available to us to address that. I don't know, Mark, anything you wanted to throw in there? Or sorry, I'm just going.
Bad developer days.
Bad developer days.
Bad developer days.
Bad developer days.
Yeah.
So last little bit of context here. So if we think about the foundation, the core aspects of an engineering platform, right? And this can often be the way, this is sort of the layering in which we at Microsoft approached building up our engineering platform as well. At the base, you have what we think of as the core engineering system. What are the tools that your software development teams are using on a daily basis, from their IDEs through their, the tools they use for source control and work management, right, issues and that kind of stuff, how they're doing DevOps, how they're, kind of monitoring those kinds of things, right? So getting some consistency and alignment there. That was a multi-year journey for us inside of Microsoft to just get everybody to Git-based code repos. You would think that would be pretty straightforward. You would think most engineers would be pretty happy about that. I have thousands of emails I could share with you that say it's not universally true. But we did it, right? Next step is, okay, now we've got some of that baseline, let's look at the environment that we're deploying, the environment we're deploying into. What kind of consistency, what guardrails do we want to put in place in terms of the runtime environments, compute and storage? How are we doing monitoring? How are we dealing with all of those fundamentals around security and privacy and compliance? How are we monitoring and managing and getting telemetry back, right? So that we know, or we have confidence and understanding, are the changes we're making having the impacts we want on the customer experience and products? And then finally getting up into the actual sort of application workloads, right? Do we have an opinionated way in which websites, customer-facing websites are built within the company, or web APIs, right? Sort of, you think of those starting app templates customized to your organization. Inside Microsoft today, we are completely covered, I would say, on the bottom. All the organizations have now gotten to the point where they're at least meaningfully onboarded to the core engineering platform. We're probably in the 75% space as far as the application platforms. And we have a couple examples of those sort of app workload type templates that poke out at the top. My favorite example is in the microservice world. So this is actually also an example of where that inner sourcing happened. So the team that builds the backend services for Teams, Microsoft Teams is a newer sort of application for us, especially in the Microsoft world. So its backend architecture is cloud native, or mostly cloud native, right? So it's, microservice and all those kind of things. Those architects, when they were starting out, like, hey, we don't want every individual microservice team going out and reinventing some of the common things that you need for microservices around discovery and circuit breakers and how we're going to do telemetry and that kind of stuff. So they created a framework, a microservice framework for themselves. It's called R9 internally inside Microsoft. As part of the one engineering system group, we're like, whoa, you're not the only ones doing this. So let's get that into the engineering platform. So we worked with them to have it developed in a way that it could be onboarded into our one engineering system and made available to everyone. Those services happen to be built in modern .NET. So the .NET team is like, well, we have customers building microservices. We should think about how this gets to them. And so we actually brought that all the way in to modern .NET. And so what you know as .NET Aspire is actually what started as this internal microservice framework for the Teams team. So it's a great example of how these things can flow all the way through and how developers can kind of contribute into that, right? So, but again, every organization is going to be a little different in where you start and where you end there. So to really make this real, we want to make sure that we don't have to go through that, meet everybody else in the company process of figuring out how to get what I need. And so we really need to think about the experience of our engineering teams, right? And so layering in, like, how do we make this self-service so that engineers can get access to what they need? You got to sort through and figure out, okay, how are we going to, how are we going to manage the developer's identity? How are we going to think about, orchestration of the provisioning and deprovisioning the things they need, granting and removing access to what they need, component catalogs, component governance, all those kinds of things, right? And then ultimately also those team insights that allowed us to go start doing these things like engineering thrive on the other end, right? So that's sort of the underpinnings of how we think about this and the way we approached it. The last part of this that I'll touch on is like, okay, well, how do we actually start approaching the onboarding? We didn't just like magically build this thing and say, everybody, here it is, right? We think of it in these kind of three motions, this idea of start right, stay right, and get right. And that's really the way we approached adoption. Turns out, new teams that are just getting started, teams that haven't built anything, a lot easier to get them to onboard to a common platform that has a bunch of value because you don't have the why is your thing better than the thing I already built conversation, right? They haven't done it yet. They're a little more open to it. Gives us a great validation ground to understand that what we're doing is having the value intended and start building up that sort of internal set of champions that can help, go out and talk about this. Obviously, if you started people in the right spot, we want to keep them there, right? We've started them in a good direction. Let's keep those guardrails in the right place so that they're not accidentally falling off and getting into a bad situation. Turns out, I've actually never met an engineer that wanted to do the bad things, right? They wanted to do the right stuff. They just maybe weren't given the tools or were given deadlines and like, oh, I got a shortcut, I can go do this, right? I'll come back to it later, right? Those kinds of things. So how do we just prevent that situation, help them do the right stuff? And then finally, the get right. Okay, so not everything's new. Lots of brownfield out there, lots of things that have been worked on for a long time. How do we start onboarding them? Well, some of it is just being clear on the value. Some of it for us was some fortunate near misses, right? Think about, large, broad-scale component vulnerabilities that have happened over the years. I always mention like Log4j because everybody seems to remember that one. Like, what happened when that happened? The bridge, right? Everybody get on. Let's understand who's actually impacted by this. All right, if you can actually attest that you're not impacted, you can drop off. All right, 5 people, right, out of thousands. Now let's go talk about how you're going to remediate it, how you're going to each deploy these things, right? For us, those people that dropped off first were the ones that were already onboarded to the one engineering system team. The one engineering platform. That team came in and said, we know you and you have vulnerabilities. Here's PRs waiting for you to review to remediate that, and our pipeline will push it back out when you're ready, right? minimal work that they had to do versus everybody else who was on there for weeks, right? So we had a few of those things that started getting people motivated, like, yeah, let's do that, right? And then, yes, at the end of the day, it's bring out the sticks, right? And, the beatings will continue until this is done, getting the exact support to do it, right? That's the last resort, but obviously it happens. So that's kind of the basis of what we were doing. Now let's think about how does AI play a role in this? So yesterday morning, Amanda talked a bit about this sort of evolution of Copilot, right? So from the completions into the chat kind of experience. So like the 2024 world, right? So in 2024, from the One Engineering System, we took advantage of that and said, what could we do to really bring the engineering platform closer to folks, make it easier than ever to deal with some of these initiatives that we were going to go do. So here's just a short video of something that we did back then.
This video shows how the OneES team has used GitHub Copilot chat extensibility to offer help regarding OneES initiatives. So what we have here is MobiUI. It's an MS Azure repo. And we're going to jump right in and ask GitHub Copilot directly, what is CFS? CFS is a OneES initiative. Now, GitHub Copilot itself only knows public information about what CFS potentially could stand for. So it gives an answer, but it's not the answer we're looking for. So what we're going to do is use the extensibility in GitHub Copilot chat for asking about OneES things specifically. And now this is actually pulling in OneES, and it is in fact reporting. CFS stands for Central Feed Services, and it's providing a bunch of background information about CFS. So now we can drill in further and say, okay, so now, help me with my specific repo. Do I need to onboard my repo to CFS? And what the OneES extension is actually doing here is it's making calls off to gather information specific to this repository. So it's about this specific engineering asset. And indeed, it's figuring out, okay, so it's in scope for CFS, this repo. And now let's see if there are any action items to be taken with respect to CFS. And in fact, there are two of them. There's an NPM action item and a NuGet action item. So now we can just start having a conversation about this. And so let's ask it, get a sample NPM-RC to use. And so now here's an example of that NPM-RC file we could use. Okay, well, that's great. But, it's provided some placeholder values here, and I want to push it even further and ask, is there an existing feed that I can use? And as it turns out, the information provided by the CFS team as part of that plugin says that, yes, indeed, there is in fact one called One Public Packages that has already been created by the CFS team. And so what I'm actually going to do is basically ask it, please fill that out for me in that NPM-RC file that you gave me as a template before. And there it is. It's provided me that updated NPM-RC file. And so I think I'm kind of good with that. And it's said, I need to place it in that source UI folder. So I'm going to go ahead and create that NPM-RC file. And I'll just sort of insert the contents at the cursor. There it is. I've placed it in the NPM-RC file. Save the file. And now we're going to sort of finish up here and say, okay, so I did what I think was right. And now I'm even asking Copilot, can you check that I did that correctly? And it's going off and it's searching my repo for NPM-RC files. It's finding the one that I just added. And it's checking that contents and making sure that it is indeed valid. Thank you for listening.
So cool, but that's so 2024, right? Like, nice. I didn't have to go to a bunch of wiki pages and try to figure things out, right? I could have a conversation, but kind of, going back to a statement Amanda made yesterday during her keynote, this is still that, like, I had to know to go do this. I had to go know to, I need to bring in this One Engineering System chat thing. The One Engineering System team had to build it as a Copilot specific extension, right? That was only going to be kind of useful in that experience, right? How do we, if we think about where the world, where we're at today, right now, 2025, we're in, we've got agent mode, we've got coding assistance, we've got both synchronous and asynchronous ways for Copilot to help us and take action and perform these things, right? We've also got these standards that are emerging, right? MCP, A2A, those kinds of things, where now I can actually take an existing set of tools, quickly expose it as a tool for the LLM, right? And that same tool can be used by lots of different experiences. So what what we can do is we can go make these experiences, make our engineering platform, make our organization's context and guidance available to the engineers in whatever experience they're using, right? So whether that's a command line, whether that's through the IDE, whether that's through Copilot, whether that's through a crew of agents working for me, right? I don't have to stop and think about where to go. It could just kind of be present in my experience. And that's actually the way we do it inside Microsoft, right? We don't have an internal developer portal. Okay, technically we do. It is an extraordinarily lame SharePoint site, right? That is really just the, hey, no, you should really just go, file new in VS Code, or if you're starting something new, and you'll just get what you need, right? So with that, let's take a look. I'll hand it to Mark, and maybe let's take a look at so how do we really take this forward into that kind of world?
As Jay was talking about, in the demo that we had, or the slide that we had earlier, circa 2024, ages ago, you really had to know what that intent is, and you see this separation between intent and what I actually have to go do, and the developer, in that case, Steven, who pulled that video together, still had to do a lot of things, right? And how many folks have used agent mode so far? Yeah, okay, so it's awesome, right? And it really helps us, pull all of that information together. But one of the big things that we've recognized in the years that we've been talking about platform engineering is it's not just a thing that you do, right? It's your organizational standards. It's your best practices. And so as you're working with these agentic tools, you want to make sure that those things get pulled inside of that when you're working with the agent. And we've started thinking about this as sort of these executable standards, right? When you're generating code, when you're generating artifacts, you want those things to conform to the standards that you've outlined, that you've put in place, and avoid that institutional amnesia that you get. Somebody leaves the team, oh, I forgot how to do that, right? Or your documents are spread all over the place and you can't find anything. So let's take a look at, and of course, one of the ways that we do that is we use MCP to enable Copilot to go off and talk to all of these tools to pull in that context and do a lot of that heavy lifting, that searching for us, right? And that's really the way that we integrate, kind of brings and bridges all that information together and exposes all of that knowledge to us. All right, so let's go take a look at how this might work. So how many people have seen our eShop example over the years? All right, come on, everybody's got to put their hands up. All right. So we looked at the eShop and said, what we really would like to have is a wish list capability inside of the eShop, right? So I'm a developer on the team. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to go off, pardon me, and implement that wish list. So I'm going to do that in a way that is in accordance with my organizational standards. So there's a little bit of easy bake oven inside of here. So I'm in a branch that's before wish list because, all right, yep, thank you. All right, so now let me go back here. And how's that? See that in the back? Pretty good? Yep, okay. So now I was saying there's a little bit of a easy bake oven because I'm working in a branch which is the before wish list branch. And if I look at the source code, you can see I don't have anything in here regarding wish list or anything like that. And so one of the things I want to do, oops, let's get rid of that. I want to bring up Copilot. That's the one I want, and I'll clear that off. So one of the things that I'd like to be able to do is I'd like to understand what my organizational standards actually are as I go through that. So I can say, what are my organization, if I can spell. And all of that searching that we used to do on the wiki, all that hunting around that we used to have to do, we don't have to do that anymore. We can actually find the developer and meet them where they are in the tool that they're using. And this will work also in, we'll see in a minute, this will work in GitHub as well. And so this is going through and it's saying, here are all the things that your organization has to do when you're starting a new feature. Here are your infrastructure standards. These are mandatory. You have some feature flagging requirements that you need to do, and you need to do some code implementation. And notice here that I have actually some specific patterns for my project here. Those are located as of right now a set of GitHub instructions. So these are the Copilot instructions that you see. And one of the reasons we put these in here is so you can, when the repository is set up, you can establish the set of instructions that are going to guide Copilot. And if there are changes to those, you can simply get a pull request on the instructions and adopt them when you need to at your pace. So these are the instructions, and now that we've got that, I'm going to say, let's start looking at tell me about issue 18, and we'll take a look at our GitHub repository here in a minute, but I've got an issue 18 that's out there, and that issue 18 is one that's going to tell me that I need to go and implement a wish list. And you'll see that it's not going to have a lot of information inside of it. There we go. So it's gone out to the GitHub MCP server, it's done a get issue, and it's pulled that in. And so now I want to create the ADR because in my requirements, I have to create an architectural decision record. So I'm going to ask Copilot to generate that for me.
Yeah, I think, and while you do that, like while you're typing that,
Yep.
right? Like the thing that you'll notice here is like, if we looked at the issue in GitHub, all it's going to have is a really terse version of those 3 requirements, right? The stuff below of saying, hey, you're going to probably need an ADR because you're doing architectural change, those things, those weren't in the issue, right? Those weren't in the work item. That's what got pulled in, right, from that organizational standards that, in this case, we specified in the instructions file.
Yeah, we
right?
can go look at the issue if we want. Right over here. You can look at our issues. We'll get to that later. Maybe we can look at the issue. And there's 18 right there. And as Jay said, it's pretty basic. Okay? So let's go back into our VS Code. And now I'm going to say create the ADR for issue 18. And what it's going to do is it's going to, again, take all of those instructions. It's going to look at all of the requirements that are specific to my organization, that are also specific to the eShop project that I'm working on. And it's going to create the architectural record that I can use to feed into the next step of my development process. And so this will take a second as it churns and churns and churns. And it should go off and say, all right, now I'm ready to start building this out. All right, it's going to go and churn. And what I will do is I will go ahead and advance to the Easy Bake Oven version of this. So we'll stop that. And I'll bring up the terminal again. Let's see. And I will say, we'll check out the main branch here. Okay, so this is after we've gone off and created that ADR. And the other thing that I did after I created the ADR is I said to Copilot, begin work on issue 18. And it goes and it actually reads, it starts generating all of the source code files, all of the test files. So it actually takes a while to go through and churn and create all of those artifacts. And so the result is what you see here, committed to main, where we actually have our source code. And inside of our source code, you can now see that I've got the wish list API here. We can see that we've got our ADR created for us as well. So this is the ADR for the wish list. And let's maximize that so we can start seeing what we have. So you can start see here that this is how it started looking at taking those instructions that we have, the corporate standards that we have, and actually translating that down into an architecture record that the next step of that process, when I say begin work on 18, starts to create. It says I have to create a separate wish list service, need to do some user preferences, some risk and mitigation, and we should also see in here our feature flagging capability as well. Let's see. Rationale decisions and some context. Well, we'll show the feature flagging here in a second because we'll jump into the code. And this was all generated for us. If we look at the wishlist API and our extensions, this was all generated by Copilot for us. And if we look at, let's see, find our here in our wish list button, let's see, you can start to see that this is what was generated inside of our code to handle all of the wish lists. We put it behind a feature flag using app configuration. So what does that actually look like in practice? So let's look over at the website. Where'd my website go? I keep doing that. Here we go. So let's go now take a look at what was actually created for me. Here we go, right up there. All right, so this is what was created, and you notice that there is no wish list capability. I don't have a logged in user at this point, so if I go back over here and I browse this, it's going to make me log in to purchase. Wow. This is the point where I shake the machine so the network goes faster. All right. There we go. So notice I'm not logged in. So let me go ahead and log in now and have that logged in user experience. Maybe. There we go. Nope. Oh, so now I'm logged in as Alice. So it took me through the login experience. And still, you can see that I don't have the wish list. And that's because by default, it's turned off. So let's go into our Azure portal. We can find the app configuration that we have here. And we can go in and we can actually see our feature flag that was implemented. I think this is running in West US 19 or something like that. Yes. So, all right. So here we're loading up the portal. I'll drop down into the feature management aspect. And you can see that as soon as this pops up, you'll see the feature flag that was already implemented by the code, by Copilot, according to our organizational standards. Maybe you will. Try that again. Let's see if I can turn off the wireless. See if it hops on there. There we go. All right, so there's our wish list that we had there, and notice it's disabled. So we'll turn that on, and now all of the users that come in, I don't have to reload I don't have to redeploy the application. I don't have to do anything except turn that feature flag on. Now, because the code's been generated according to my organizational standards, which says you have to have test cases, you have to put new features behind a feature flag. If I go back to our application and I refresh that, or I browse something now, I should see our wish list pop up here. Let's refresh that. And there it is. There's our wish list that we have. And now I can add that nice watch that Jay's going to get for me to the wish list. I probably should have picked something more expensive. Huh? Yeah, that's what I should have done. All right, so that's great. And you saw in that instance, you saw how we use VS Code and Copilot to coordinate and drive our organizational standards. But one of the things that we've been talking about is you don't just have a single agent. You start to have these agents that work all over the place on your behalf. One of the other agents that you can actually start to integrate very easily into is the SRE agent. And so one of the things that we did here as well is on our resource group, we enabled, I'll show it back over here. We enabled the SRE agent in our resource group to kind of monitor the set of resources that we have. And so if we go in and start looking at that, automatically the SRE agent is picking up all the information for us. So here we see it's deployed. Down here, our SRE agent. And if we go look at that, we can ask it, simple things like, is my wish list API healthy? And so again, because the SRE agent is already attached to that resource group, it's going through, it's pulling all of that information, much of which has already been established and generated and created for us according to our our industry standards. And it's going to go through and be able to process all of that and give me interesting information about the application or alert me when something goes wrong, like you saw in Brady's example in the keynote. And so I might be able to pull up another one. And so you can see here that I started to say, I ran through this last night. I said, is my wish list API healthy? It comes back and says, yep, you're up and running, you're available. And I wanted to know, well, what are the recent problems that I've had? And so I can start interacting and kind of querying what's going on with my application, because we might see some intermittent errors that don't come up. I also want to know if there's been issues with recent 500, or if I want to look at any redeployments that have happened over time and why we might have redeployed for that. So that's how we can use and start tying together the SRE agent. Now, one of the things that I did in this demo was I walked through everything through VS Code, right? Because I was a developer, I kind of wanted to be in control. I wanted to watch all that machinery work and kind of test it as it goes. But we've also talked about the software coding agent. So we can take the exact same, hey, create me a wish list, and assign that to Copilot. And I mentioned earlier, this was the second issue that we had. So this was the issue 16, which looks very similar, like add wish list support to eShop. And the reason we added that there is to show that this one was actually assigned to Copilot. It picked it up, it followed the exact same steps that are in the instructions that are in the repo that says, these are the steps you need to do as you begin working on the wish list API. And as Copilot does, it creates the architectural decision record for us, and you can start to see how we started iterating with Copilot on the code, on the ADR, et cetera. And so that's how we start to take our organizational standards that our platform engineering team puts in place for us, that we iterate on and improve as we go, make those relevant and immediately accessible to a developer where they're working, and use those same sets of best practices, of organizational standards, of our governance policies, and be able to apply them to the code and the agents that are working on our behalf to create the artifacts. And I'll turn it, I think, back over to you, Jay.
Yeah, and so there's an obvious question that's probably in your head, because you heard about it probably at least once or twice.
Oh, we're going to add the wish list.
So, okay, so how do we take this, how do we think about taking this even further forward, right? One of the things that, again, using these kinds of tools and building upon these experiences, right? Looking at how can we leverage instruction files, how can we, leverage reusable prompts and those kinds of things, right? That started to inform this experiment that's out on GitHub right now, SpecKit, right? And you saw it in the keynotes and those kinds of things. But essentially now taking, right, I look at this as right now it's really kind of enabling us to do two things. One, provide a consistent pattern that we can train and we can teach our engineers on in terms of how to interact with Copilot in a consistent way, right? This notion of, spec, plan, generate some tasks, and then go implement, right? Where each of these steps, right, are a nice human reviewable chunk, right? The cognitive load isn't crazy unless you make it huge, right? But you can do this in nice segments that you can look at it. So that's one aspect of the consistency. The other part is then we can feed into those individual steps a standard set of prompts, right, that start bringing those organizational guidelines and context into the experience, right? So when you're doing the spec or when you create the constitution, right, that is the governing rules for your repo and processes, that's the stuff that can come from the organization. And your platform engineering team can now distribute that out, right, to these teams in a common way, right? So if we were to look at, I did this a little bit earlier, is I took that repo, right, and I said, okay, let's go, kind of enable SpecKit for it. So, SpecKit doesn't have to be only used on greenfield things. We can add it to an existing repo, right? And then I created that constitution file. Now, the fact that I already had, the same instructions files in there, SpecKit just created the constitution with exactly what I wanted already. It picked up on that, right? And now we could, remove those from the other instruction file if we wanted to, and SpecKit will start using them here. The nice thing, and part of the reason we have this sort of implemented in two ways right now, is we don't yet have the ability to have the coding agent actually use SpecKit yet, right? But by putting it in the Copilot instructions file, obviously it does use that, so it respects that, and that's why you were able to see the synchronous and asynchronous experiences were the same. But then as I go through this, right, and I just go use that, okay, spec, plan, tasks, right, you see it start going through and doing all of that work. And there's a bunch of other interesting files in here. You saw the early sort of indication of it in some of what Mark was walking through, but like some really interesting files that show up are things like the research MD, right? When you get into that actual kind of technology implementation specific plan, you can see how SpecKit drove Copilot to actually go do the research and say, what are the options? What are approaches I could take? And why is it landing on a decision that it landed on, right? So you can go review that and say, yep, I agree with it, or no, I don't. We're going to go kind of override the plan and do something different, right?
I'd also say a couple of things there. When Chris and I were working on a lot of the coding aspects of it, and that's really when Chris was working on a lot of the coding aspects of it, if I'm being honest, he and I would have some discussions about this, and we really recognize the importance of getting those standard templates as input, because it turns out the more standard your templates are that you input, the more the LLM responds and learns and gives you more consistent output. And the other observation that Chris and I had as we were going through this is, sometimes, we talked about, I did a little bit of the easy bake oven because it takes a while to create all of those artifacts. And so a lot of the time we talk about, oh, this is going to save me a lot of time. And in Chris's case, he said, I don't know if it saved me a lot of time, but what it did is it made me better. It created more consistent artifacts for me. It created more artifacts for me. I probably wouldn't have created as many test cases or test runs that I did. So I was able to have a more complete solution because of the way I started and worked with the tools to create that. Yep. And I thought that was a very interesting observation as we went through that. The standard inputs, getting better outputs, getting more complete outputs.
And I think one of the things that also starts kind of speaking to is, going back to okay, how are we measuring these things? How are we thinking about it, right? When we think about how do we measure the impact of what GitHub Copilot is doing for us as an organization, there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction of, let's just go measure how much code it generated or how many PRs that it create that got merged. That's good. That data's good. But it's not sufficient. You need to also understand and kind of have that sort of narrative or the story coming in and understanding what were the developers trying to do. I'll give you a great example. Inside Microsoft, we're obviously trying to measure all these things so we can help you all think about how to do it as well. And we were measuring, how many PRs survived, how many Copilot agent generated PRs actually got merged. Turns out, when we're looking at some of the most active repos, it was only about 25%. Immediately, that's got to be bad, right? 75% of what coding agent was doing was getting thrown away. And then we talked to the engineers about it. Like, yeah, that's what I expect. I asked it to go generate 4 different implementations for me, and I picked the best one. right? So getting those two sides of that story really helped us understand and how to think about it. And then we asked the obvious question. Then we started asking the question: do we want them doing 4 different implementations and trying, or is that going to get costly? But you now have a different thing that you can focus on and try to understand, right? So it's really thinking about how do these things all come together, right? What I think we're going to be excited to do next, as we think about further advancing things like Spec Kit, taking it out of an experiment, making it more available, is just seeing how we can continue to leverage this, leverage it with you all as well to understand, is this really making a difference in terms of, one, putting some more appropriate guardrails on the LLM, right? It's one of the things you'll find if you really get into this is that the Constitution does a nice job of putting a bit of determinism into a non-deterministic process, right? Because you can really kind of constrain, hey, when you're doing this, I want you to think about performance in this way versus this time it decided to think about performance, next time I reran it, maybe it didn't, right? And you start getting more consistency out of the models, out of things that way. You also start shifting your mindset a bit and starting to think about what's the most important artifact to be versioning and pivoting on, right? Is it the code? Or is it these sort of spec type artifacts, right? Or is it both? But how do you think about those things? How do you think about those rework stuff? So I think lots of potential here. Just starting to sort of tease out a little bit of how we see this happening. Hopefully that makes some sense. I think we have a couple minutes if we want to. Any questions? Thoughts? Silence? Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully this was useful. Definitely would love to hear, feedback both on, Spec Kit. We'd love to hear feedback on, how you're approaching platform engineering, what's working well, what's not.
How you're using AI.
How you're using AI, of course.
Platform engineering efforts, yeah.
Yeah, totally. So anyway, with that, thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much.